Hi, this is Mark.
And this is John.
And
we're the Armchair Thinkers.
And today we're going to be discussing a variety of topics, including the new British election, North Korea, and
Nuclear war.
Nuclear war, yeah.
Right. And we'll get to all of those in due time. And perhaps even we'll have a word to say on another popular topic in Canadian media right now, marijuana legalization.
Yes.
So, let's begin with the British election, because I know that you are a keen follower of politics in Europe, and you've got some pretty strong feelings on this, both on what it means socially and economically. Do you want to go into that?
Well, first of all, you have to remember there's general elections, and then there's events that go beyond general elections. The leader of a general election is going to be around for 5 years, but this next election is going to determine UK for, maybe the next 100 years with how it goes. So what I'm talking about is the Brexit negotiations. The reality is Britain voted for Brexit, and she did Article 50, but then right after she did that, then she had a general election, right? And I mean, although the polls say, she's not going to be defeated because she has such a lead, you have to realize, if she was defeated, then you'd have the Labour government in charge, and they're pro-European Union, despite its many flaws, and they're also pro-immigration. My feeling is they would do what's called a soft Brexit, and basically have the UK not represented in government, but follow every year rule that the Europeans want them to, and hopefully keep most of the free trade.
So basically the European Union in all but name.
Exactly.
You say all this despite identifying as left-wing, and more on the authoritarian end of left-wing too. It is a stereotype, but a lot of people associate that with being pro-European Union. Why do you feel the European Union is a bad idea?
Okay, so this doesn't apply as much to Britain because they do have the pound, but you have to remember that the wealth of the nation lies in the currency. When you don't have control of your currency, then you can't, move the economy in the way that you want. A prerequisite to having a new economic system is to have your own country and your own borders. Now, Britain had trouble with immigration, and what happens is when you have new immigrants coming in, they're immediately going to find whatever is a steady, 8 to 10 to 12 hour workday, and then, get rent and so on, right? That leads to shortages in housing, especially since the British particularly are really bad at building houses. They don't get approved. If you increase population and you're not increasing housing, well, you're going to either create homelessness, or you're going to find that not only are the people on welfare living in public housing, you're also going to have people working retail, people working fast food, and then eventually people working in factories, and then eventually, everybody just not being able to afford housing or living in public housing.
It seems like there's a lot of decisions being made by people in the government that are very short-term focused. I mean, there is only so many factory jobs to go around nowadays, and fast food often isn't even full-time. I mean, you just can't have a country of people, even if it's just, say, the poor or immigrant swath of the population, working those kinds of jobs and not have mass unemployment and not have instability.
Well, yeah, that's right. And a lot of people say, oh, well, they'll take the crappy jobs and then we'll take the better jobs. But you have to remember, you put this in perspective, right? So the biggest success in the tech world is Microsoft Word. And Microsoft employs 12 people to manage that. Mm-hmm. So when you say, oh, there's educated jobs, the reality is there actually isn't. Let's say about 3/4 of people are going to be either bottom end general labor or maybe a hairdresser or something.
Mm-hmm. Even if you are one of the lucky few who does manage to somehow get one of these prestigious tech jobs, you need to get a lot of education and training. And who knows how long that particular job is going to last you. Trying to say, oh, we've got these educated jobs is very silly, because as much as it's great when somebody fills them, they take a long time to train for, and it isn't necessarily clear to me what someone's going to do after they're let go, because the job market's tough everywhere. And I don't know what your thoughts are on that, but
well, if you're working on the tech, you basically have to get in right away, otherwise your skills are out of date.
mm-hmm.
And then if you get laid off, you have to find a job right away, otherwise again your skills go out of date.
Yeah, well, so the world in general right now, especially tech, is all about keeping ahead of the curve, and everything moves so fast. And the fact is, if you're not continuously educating yourself, whether you're officially in the education system or not, you're lost, which I think is something that would behoove everybody to remember.
What happens is, if you aren't ahead of the curve, then you wind up being, tech support or something.
Well, I don't know. I know a lot of people that work in a call center, and the call center just axed tech support, and they're basically just working customer service now. I don't know. I don't remember the statistics exactly. I think the call center was like number one on the list of things that might be automated. So I'd like tech support. What's that as a future for someone that's into tech?
Well, I can tell you, from my perspective, if somebody's calling you, right, and I mean telemarketers, you're going to hang up. What you do is you send an automated message, and then you don't expect anybody to respond, so you expect like maybe 1 in 100,000 to actually respond to it.
Well, sure, and the whole point is to carpet bomb and to basically call as many people as possible.
Right, but you call people, you leave an automated message, they call you back, right? And then that saves money, right? And I've gotten a lot of automated calls offering to lower my credit card interest, right? And I'm sure you've gotten those too. So I'm sure that's what they're talking about. Now, I mean, if you want to actually get somebody to respond to you, it does help to have another person on the phone.
Well, I mean, the fact is, as we were saying earlier, everybody presses 0 when they get to those automated systems anyway. I mean, like, right now, they're the most useless things in the world. And it seems to me that if there is better technology out there, the people are not putting it forward. I mean, let's face it. 98% of things, yes, you can look up online, but the fact that someone is actually calling you, particularly if it's inbound, you're talking about outbound call services. The call service that I was talking about is an inbound company. So these are the sorts of people who have tried the online method, and they're calling anyway. So the fact that they're on the line speaking to you means that all of the easy solutions have failed.
Yeah, and I mean, for the vast majority of companies, like, I mean, I understand you have an automated system. So, for example, right, you have an option on there, what's your address, what hours are you open, or something like that, right? But at the end of the day, you always have to have an easy way to contact a person and know that at least half the time, they're just going to go for that option.
Exactly. Sometimes you need to put things to other people in very direct language in order to get them to understand. So they've read the instructions, but they don't really get it. And you need a human being to sit down with them and like try and see where it is they're getting confused. And so with some of these one-size-fits-all solutions, and automation is still very much at that stage now, like it's not really tailored to the person, except like I know there's YouTube recommendations and stuff like that, but even that, I think needs some fine-tuning. But a lot of it is really like, this one-size-fits-all thing, and the companies don't care, because if they make enough profit, it's good enough. You're not going to put more resources than you would get out catering to a smaller share of the market. So an unfortunate thing about that is that some people are just going to get screwed and not going to get the service that they really deserve to get.
Yeah, or they wait longer, right? The hold times are very long for these calls.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yes. And the one thing, though, that gives me some hope is that as they're scaling back the human staff at this call center, one thing that they're admitting is that the special rewards club that they put you on when you're not very good at being aggressive and making sales, it's basically where they put the nice people before they fire them, is actually eventually going to be all that's left of the call center. They've leveled with me and told me that that's their ultimate plan, because the kind and conciliatory stuff is the stuff that you're always going to need, or at least for the very, very far foreseeable future, you're always going to need a human to do. So the thing is, like, if you're in that position, you might think, oh my God, I'm going to get axed. But in the long run, if that's your skill set, you might ironically do pretty well. And it's very difficult to predict, how the job market's going to look in 20 years. But like, a lot of people are saying, yeah, it's the when more of this stuff kicks in, it's going to be the human skills that are left over.
They had that Amazon store with no person in the store, right? And I wonder, I check back there, in a little while, see how it does, right? Because
yeah, it'll be very interesting to watch. I also think that's a little bit premature. It's very difficult to get computer vision working right now for video. But again, 10 years ago, it couldn't tell the difference between a dog and a cat. So, I mean, now we're at the point where, you can start doing video, and I think it's like 20 customers in the store, like the Amazon stores are sort of starting to break down. But again, given more time and processing power, you never know what might happen. So, I don't think those are going to catch on in the next 5 years, personally. But in the next 10, it's entirely possible that we could see them coming to the fore.
Now, let's give our perspective on North Korea. Here's a little fact about North Korea. 1 in 6 people works for the military. In other words, they drank the Kool-Aid, they're working for the government, they believe in Kim Jong-il, and they have their gun at the ready, ready for any invaders.
Mm-hmm.
So, I mean, that's what scares me the most, because I realize, like they're not going to reach the United States, they're not going to reach Canada, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, U.S. invades. Yes, millions upon millions of South Koreans would die from artillery fire, and also they'd probably be able to atomic bomb Tokyo, and yes, that would create a global depression. But even after that, right, U.S. invades, 1 in 6 people shoots back at them. Well, from guerrilla warfare, if you know what you're doing and you're like on top of the hill or you're in the jungle, right, for every one person doing guerrilla fighting, they generally can shoot about 30 people before they get shot at.
Mm. So, I mean, do the math. That's going to be a very bloody and costly war if it's boots on the ground.
Yeah, so, and then if it's not boots on the ground, you could bomb them, and then whoever's left is going to control the country, right? So, I mean, and then, it'd just be continuous bombing, because, then they would build up, and then once they build up and they're angry, they would strike back again.
Mm-hmm. So, and they seem to be a kind of a more irrational country. Like with ISIS, it's different but similar in that, their strategy is not always easy to predict because they're kind of all crazy. But at the end of the day, they need the oil fields that they capture. That's why they've done as well, quote unquote, as they have, because they do control those oil fields. And ultimately, North Korea, just for practical reasons, is going to have to fall back on some kind of strategy. And I think that to a certain degree that is predictable. So I think that, you could, the craziness of the nation isn't enough to stop you from tactically winning the war. But there hasn't been a war between official states in a long time. I think Iraq was the last one.
Yeah.
And that matters. It would be a huge deal if there was a real boots-on-the-ground war with North Korea. And I don't know how likely it is, but again, nobody wants to get into it, particularly because the military is so big. Even though they would lose, it would be very bloody and costly. So I think that the most realistic scenario is, as cold and harsh as it sounds, is to stop all of the aid that's going into the country, that has been going into the country, believe it or not, still, because it's the only way that they can keep alive, and then repeat the 90s, like the most cruel thing in the world, but that would actually save more lives than anything else.
Yeah, because here's what you need to know about these countries. If the soldiers aren't fed, that's when things change.
Mm-hmm.
Doesn't matter about the people, doesn't matter about the economy. All that matters is, are the soldiers paid, are the soldiers fed? And then if they're not...
their leaders come groveling to the rest of the world and ask for aid again, because that country can't run itself.
Yeah.
It's completely in the throes of not just economic stagnation, but an economic void, basically. Like there's nothing going on of significance in that country at all, except for guns and nuclear weapons that are poorly made.
Yes, and you can see the lights that North Korea is, the dark
Yeah,
spot.
those maps of the world at night, and you've got like a tiny light where Pyongyang is, and the rest of the country is just in complete darkness.
And then Russia's got a few lights, but of course, I mean...
No, Russia and Canada are pretty sparsely populated, so they're probably the biggest nations that don't have too many lights. But again, that's just because of the sparse population. Pretty much you've got the developed world lit up and the developing world not so lit up. And but North Korea is like in a league of its own in terms of weird and crazy. You know what? Like, I think it would be immoral to do it because it would be giving the regime money, and I really don't want to do that. But I've always been tempted to go on one of those trips where that guard follows you around and they give you that fake treatment. I wanted to do it before it became a really famous thing, but now, there's all these YouTubers that have gone and everyone knows kind of what it's about. So I feel like I've kind of got the experience from a distance. But like for a while, just hearing what I've heard from like the tourists that got in like 15 years ago under that system, I was like, yes, I'm going to do that one day. That sounds hilarious, albeit kind of creepy.
Yeah, well, I mean, some of them went to prison too, so...
Well, not very many of them went to prison. For the most part, you get out of the country quite alive and quite well, albeit very weirded out after the whole experience. But you should, if you haven't seen him, you should go onto YouTube and watch like Fun for Louie doing his North Korea stuff. He gets a little more into the hinterland and talks to more of the civilians than most people do. Yeah. So I recommend his vlog for that. But there's some other ones too that document the whole experience. Then a funny Vice documentary that was done on it that was really enjoyable. So yeah, no, definitely look into it. Like, it's hilarious stuff. But let's focus on the nuclear angle just for a bit. The chances are very small, but you only need one nuclear war to fuck up the world permanently. So a lot of people are very concerned about that now, and for the first time in a long while, you do have the more paranoid members of society maybe, but also maybe the wise and cautious members of society saying, we have to remember how dreadful such a thing would be and be careful not to go down this road. On the off chance, no matter how small it is, that actually turned into a thing, how do you think it would play out?
Well, so I think if either, like, the thing is, the global market is very integrated. So even though the Japanese are, and South Koreans might be more reserved and they might, invest more in themselves, and, you don't see a whole bunch of Japanese companies all over the place other than, let's say, Toyota, right? The reality is the financial system is integrated enough that if Japan or Seoul was, A-bombed or, thrown to ashes, I think that there would be a global financial crisis because some firms would go bankrupt, and then companies that lend to those firms would go bankrupt, and then it would have a cascading effect. And so it doesn't really matter where it's from. The effect would cascade. And, like we saw this, like the European Union was going to, go down because of Greece, right? Well, South Korea is a much more bigger, important, and much more integrated company with big companies like Samsung, right? If Samsung's headquarters are destroyed, right, what that's going to have a huge impact on the world.
Yes. Yeah, huge. I mean, like, and also I think just the mere fact that a nuclear war happened, like, it's almost taken as a given that such things don't take place now. As soon as there's even that possibility in people's minds, suddenly the behavior of everyone across the world, even if it's not related to the Japanese economy or Samsung or whatever it is that gets hit, suddenly everyone across the world panics and the whole thing spirals into chaos because it's like, oh my God, this actually took place. And that is going to affect the financial market. It's going to affect just people's daily lives in general. And it's definitely going to affect the state of the media and who people vote for.
Well, and I can tell you, right, if that happened, you can be sure that everybody is going to take the day off from work that day,
Well, yeah, that's
And
probably
the
the
next few
least
days,
that's the least of people's worries. But yes,
well,
well, yeah, no, I know that'll have big effects. Like even small things like the premiere of Revenge of the Sith in 2005. It was the stupidest reason for something like this to happen, but that premiere caused so many people to call in sick that the U.S. economy took a serious dip. Moving on from the grim and dour subject of nuclear war. There is a war on in the Canadian Parliament right now and in the Canadian media over marijuana. Is the Trudeau process of legalization really enough? Is it going to make much of a difference? Is it a gimmick that he's used to get people on his side? Is it even true legalization?
well, for what I've seen, they allow you to grow 4 marijuana plants and also for stores to sell it, right?
Mm-hmm.
So that is, there's a lot of people who like certain plants or variations or something different, right, in marijuana, and they'll be able to grow their own plants. So that's good for them. And also the stores will be selling it, so that's good for the vast majority of people. Although you do wonder whether it'll end up being highly regulated and government will make poor weed.
It's quite ironic because right now it's the medicinal marijuana that everybody wants, the government-grown marijuana. Like everyone that smokes weed sees that as like the highest quality stuff that you have, and if you see someone at a party with a bag of that, everyone's like, "Oh yeah, they've got the medical marijuana." I don't like the stuff myself, but everyone I know that smokes is like that's the stuff to have. So
Yeah.
it would be extremely ironic if there was a sudden switch, and you had the government stuff being the official bad stuff. Oh, that's just a crap.
Well, it is very important, and I think it's going to provide a good source of revenue for the government. I'm pretty sure Canada still has a big deficit right now,
Hmm.
so it'll help with that. And more importantly, there's a lot of people who are making a lot of money off marijuana. So if it becomes legalized, what do all those people do, right?
Hmm.
They probably are going to have to get jobs in the marijuana shops if they can, right? I'm
Hmm.
saying if they can, right? It
Yes,
probably depends on how they, dress and look and, present themselves.
that's undeniably true.
Yeah.
But you know what? Like people can go to a party and drink a lot and be at work the next day as long as they know their limits. And people do the same thing with marijuana, even today. So it's likely to remain true in the future, except that the small detail will be it'll be legal, and you'll have probably more of those weed shops popping up where people go to smoke.
And so it's a huge decrease in the illegal economy and a slight increase in the legal economy. Of course, what's happened in the States is that the price of pot has declined significantly. So probably the government will start off taxing it a little bit and then actually have to increase the taxes because the weed will become so cheap, like $2 for a whatever,
Right? Yeah.
for an ounce or whatever,
They measure it in grams, Mark.
in grams.
What do you know? You're such a straight-laced person,
Yeah, so $2 for however many grams, and then they'll have to say, "Oh, we're gonna have to jack it up."
Yeah. So it'll be very interesting to see how that unfolds and how, if at all, it changes the culture around marijuana and what effect it has on the economy. Anyway, I think that's all for today. But definitely some big headline stuff, and we look very forward to watching all of these issues and seeing how they play out.